Thank you. Thank you, John. I've always wanted to speak to a room full of people, so thanks for being here. It's not that bad, come on. All right, so let's start. My name is Juan. I'm a core unit facilitator at Maker. That's me before I lost my razor. And yeah, a core unit facilitator is the kind of the contact between governance and each team at Maker. So yeah, my core unit is sustainable ecosystem scaling, and we try to make sure that the ecosystem scales and Maker doesn't burn on the way there. So some of the learnings, hopefully I can share with you today. My journey to DAO or to Web3 started in the corporate world. Then I moved to startups and scale-ups, some of them here in Berlin, so happy to be back. And finally, I discovered DeFi and Maker. So now I'm doing a little bit of advice for other DAOs, trying to spread the learnings, but that's a bit about me. So some disclaimers. My views are my own. I do not represent all of Maker. No one does when you're working for a DAO. Nothing of this should be taken as financial advice, legal advice, or even romantic advice. So how do we build a DAO? It's actually quite easy. Step 0, find a real problem to solve. Here I'm quoting Vitalik for some clout. Apparently your talk will rank higher, but no, I mean, tribal DAOs are cool. But I think that long-term success and when we get real penetration will be when we start addressing real issues and problems. So hopefully we'll see a lot of these DAOs moving forward. Step 1, you need the mission, the vision as the strategy. This is quite important. The vision is the why, like why are you doing this? Why do you want to address this problem? Then the mission is the how, so how do you get there? And the strategy is the actual plan, and that's the most important part where we are seeing a lot of failures lately. Step 2, create value. So how do you do this? You need to focus on the core of your community. It's very easy to actually lose track or lose focus. So ideally, you start at the very, very core for anything that's looking outwards. So the community is like, who's paying, whose problem are you really addressing? And then you can start moving outwards. And it's the same thing for the internal communities. When you're managing them, there will be a lot of noise because it's so open. So you need to be sure that you're actually managing the community in a good way, starting with the core developers and people building the product, and again, moving outwards. By the way, if anyone wants to discuss any of these frameworks later, we can do that too. Step 3, build solid pillars. So any DAO will need to focus a lot on leadership, communications, monetization, resilience, and the solution. These 3 pillars are super important, and they need to be clear and defined. And once you have this, hopefully you can move forward and scale. Step 4, set up coordination. So any organization, decentralized or not, will have work, which is what needs to be done, the workforce, which is the people doing the work, and then the capital is a bit the incentives. Usually it is some kind of money for the human race, but it could be something else. So you need to coordinate this. So again, it's all about coordination, but you need to make sure that these are moving in rhythm. And the last step is to code it, right? So you write your constitution, your values, you actually build the protocol, tokenomics, any type of process, you make it very, very clear and explicit. Dashboard, templates, documentation, this is sometimes forgotten, but very, very important. And that's pretty much it. You have your DAO, so as I promised, it's very easy. These are some examples of these frameworks or codifications out there. Python has done it for several years, Ethereum as well, Maker, but there are several in the industry, some better than others. And basically, it includes all the rules for governance to actually operate. So yeah, once you have that, you profit and you scale, hopefully without any problem, right? So this is when you start to see some of the scaling problems. Improvement proposals at scale gets quite complicated. So for someone trying to get involved, if the documentation or the processes are not very clear, it will be extremely hard to start, to know where to go, and to actually produce value. The token holders want people to produce value, and ideally, these processes are set up for this contributor to find a very easy access to producing value and to get it rewarded for that. And same thing for the internal people. So how do we manage this thing? What are the processes? What do we need to follow? Even people that are working full-time for these DAOs are having a hard time following all the processes. So having a good proposals framework, it's very important for the internal people as well. This leads to the rise of the bureaucrats. So the contributors actually become middle managers. Instead of creating value, they're just running operations. After some months or years, you start arguing that the DAO is not moving fast enough or it's not as lean. This happens a lot at scale. It becomes quite hard to prioritize. It's very easy for you can call them political parties to actually rise and stall any type of innovation with a lot of really good arguments. It's like, oh, but we should be focusing on other things. So the whole prioritization thing becomes quite messy if you don't have good frameworks in place beforehand. And yeah, the bureaucrats, if they're getting their compensation, they will try to keep their job instead of producing work. So instead of creating value, it's more about maintaining the status quo and making sure that they are the ones that know all the intricacies of the processes and that they actually know how to run the governance and the bureaucracy. So how do we challenge this? So yeah, the idea is to go back to software. So coders unite. If we go back to the basics, I'm not a coder. I did some Python in the past, but this is a bit of an oversimplification. But basically, you have the different layers. You have the kernel, which barely changes, if at all, or with any major upgrade. Then you have the OS layer. That's where all the communications happen. Well, in terms of plugins, I guess. Then you have all the applications, or these are a bit like the processes or the backend. Then you have the UI, that's the interaction, and finally you have the users, which are interacting with the whole stack. So that's a bit the layers of a software. And yeah, this is the slide I want to spend the most time on, because actually we can map governance to these processes or to these layers. So on the kernel, we have the constitution. We can have amendments to the constitution. Some people argue that you should have a very immutable constitution that will never change. That way, the protocol will be actually immutable and infinite. Then on top of that, you have the OS layer, which is the protocol and the tokenomics. You can actually add features to this. And you might want to change things from time to time. And I'll discuss this a little bit later. On top of that, you have any type of processes. So how do teams come and interact, partners? How do you make it composable, and how do you actually produce value towards these processes? The UI part is a bit forgotten from time to time. You have the different templates that you should build. Dashboards are super important, and the documentation is also crucial in this part. And finally, you have the users, which might be the product users or partners. You have the token holders, which are the owners of the actual protocol. And then you have the contributors, which are people that will bring value to this. On the very left, I put the state, which is a bit like how is the system working right now? What's the status, and how do you interact with the system in a very easy way? So that will hopefully bring in more people to participate in the community and to bring value and to make it scale. So how do you propose the change? And yeah, it's all about dependencies. So in this example, in the OS layer, someone comes with this great idea of we should, well, in my example, it's change the voting contract, so we should do something different with in the way we vote, right? So someone could propose that and bring the changes, but then you will be forgetting any dependency that actually has an impact on. So maybe you need to change some processes, you need to readapt some dashboards, contributors need to know, so anything that has to do with change management, and the token holders also need to be aware of these changes. So if this gets approved by the token holders, hopefully they know what they're voting on, and the change gets approved. If you're not thinking about all the dependencies, what you're getting, it's a mess, because you have outdated dashboards, the process won't work anymore, you have a orphan code, meaning that that some of the processes will break at some point. People are not sure if you're using the old version or the new version. So it's quite important to go through the whole dependencies when you commit this change, and to force contributor to think about them all. So yeah, a change can only be enabled when all dependencies have been solved, and ideally you commit them all at the same time. You could have some kind of, as long as everyone's aware, there could be some time differences, but you need to make sure that any change is holistic enough to be able to change the whole thing. So yeah, as I was mentioning, this avoids orphan code, unclear rules, so it's much more approachable for people in the outside to join, or for people in the inside to know what's happening next. Lack of UIs. Right now, there are not many DAOs that have all the UIs needed for normal users or for non-technical users to operate. The lack of documentation is also quite important. And then you have frustrated users, both from the community and from the outside, that might have an issue with that. So yeah, these are why dependencies are quite important. How do you do this? This is the governance lifecycle. It's not product, but it's a cycle of governance a bit. So you start with identifying the challenges. Ideally, you have a backlog with this, and you have smart people that are managing it. Shout out to any forum managers that's out there, and they are the unsung heroes of a well-run governance. But then you move to the opportunities evaluation. So you go through this backlog, you say, okay, we think that it's really important that we focus on this opportunity right now. This is where the most risk is, so we should address it, or this is where we can grow the most. So you evaluate these opportunities, and you move to the solution and discussion stage, where you say, this is the problem, how are we going to solve it? So you move a little bit more towards that. Finally, you go to the frameworks or usable MVPs. What does this mean? It means that if you create a new standard or a new reporting, you can start trying it with really basic tools like a spreadsheet, and you can move forward once that it's working and you actually know that all the dependencies are being covered. You can move it towards making it more software and making it more accessible for contributors, users, etc. So once you have these usable MVPs that are actually being used, you can make them stronger. You can do an improvement proposal. I would argue that this should be almost at the very, very end, when you have all the dependencies covered. And then you finally move to the software development stage, where you actually make it easier and harder to move. But going through the MVP is quite important at this. It's a quite important stage as well. So the main takeaways: software development over managers and operators. This means that teams should actually work to make themselves obsolete, or to ship software instead of just running the show, right? So any team that's giving an update every month or every week or every quarter about anything, you should push them to actually make this dashboard that updates on real time, and that it's super clear for anyone to read, so that we don't need you anymore. And then you can set up the incentives so that they have more job security or an incentive to actually move to solving a harder challenge. The frameworks is quite important. It's very easy to start attacking people when you are some cartoon or a pet on the internet. So the forum moderators or anyone in governance should try to discuss governance compared to, or discuss the framework instead of discussing the people. That's why it's very important that these proposals are very abstract and repeatable, instead of, okay, we want to build these towers, and you should say, like, okay, every time we want to build towers, we're going to use this recipe. And then people will start thinking how do you build these things in general, and then you can apply it to this instance. But the important thing is that it will create equality for everyone, because anyone can come and build towers based on that framework, instead of being like, oh, the other team did it, why can't we do it? So that's what creates equality. It's to discuss the framework and not the people. There will be less politics and less gossip. And as I was mentioning, the dependencies need to be considered. That's harder than it looks. But an improvement proposal can only be applied when all dependencies are set. So I think that's it for me today. I don't know if there are any questions. I'll be happy to take them. But yeah, if you want to reach me on Telegram or by email, this is my contact. And thank you for listening.
Thank you, Juan. Yeah, we have about 5 minutes for a Q&A.
Be nice, please.
Hi, Juan. Sorry, you mentioned at some point that dApps would lack UIs and documentation, leading to frustrated users. Is that the unavoidable nature of DAOs, or because contributors are too self-centric, or is there hope for the users? Is it just a question of maturation, maybe, of the apps over time?
Yeah, I mean, this is not exclusive to DAOs. I think that we've seen that a lot of companies go for a really long time with undocumented software, and it's harder for new joiners after a couple of years to actually join this startup or scale-up. So I think that the documentation part is crucial. What you could do as a token holder, or when you're setting up the framework, is to say your product is not considered shipped or done until the documentation is there, or until the UI is there. And this will vary from DAO to DAO. Like, you could have a super small DAO of really geeky people that use the console or the terminal to access the blockchain, and that's fine too. But if you wanted to make it more accessible and more and open it up for the next million people, then documentation and UIs are going to be crucial. But you are right that it's not easy. Most people tend to not care about documentation, but as a token holder, you can a little bit force it. It's like the work is done. So the project that you propose includes this documentation part, and the work is done whenever the documentation or the UIs are done. Otherwise, it's not. You have partially implemented it. Not all dependencies are covered, so sorry, but it's not done yet. No one else? Thank you, Berlin. You've been great.